you handle the queue and all that stuff? I don't think I have that. You use that too. But either way, can you manage the room?
Yeah, sure.
All right, yeah. Testing. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Philadelphia. This is the transport area meeting. If you are not interested in the transport area open meeting, please find yourself in another room. But I expect we'll have a fairly interesting discussion today. I'm Martin Duke, one of the transport ADs, and this is Zahed.
Hi.
Okay. This is the note well. Some of you have already seen this once this week. You'll see it many more times. Basically, please read it if you're not familiar with it. It covers a lot of intellectual property principles to follow here at IETF. You can find it in any search engine. Again, for those of you who are just getting started here at IETF114, here are some meeting tips on how to use MeetEcho. If you are here, I strongly encourage you to use your mobile device to join MeetEcho Lite, which will allow you to enter the queue. We will manage an electronic queue today. And of course, if you're remote, you've already figured out how to use MeetEcho. And as always, please mute yourself if you're out there online. Oh, also the policy here is to please wear your mask. I see if you're not presenting. So those of you who are here, I see pretty good compliance. So thank you. And of course, here's some, transport area. We're always helping to summarize the state of the area for you here at 114. So here's some more information about the meeting. Okay, our agenda is going to be a little different than usual. I historically haven't invited talk. I will do a lot more talking than normal, but hopefully other people talk as well. There'll be plenty of opportunity for that. We'll run through as quickly as possible our normal kind of summary of how things are going in transport area. We will move up the open mic to the beginning for any non-congestion control working group topics. And once that is, we'll cap that at 10 minutes, and then we'll leave the balance of the time to discuss the congestion control working group proposal. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, there's an email on the TSV area list that you can consult that could maybe give you a quick intro to what we're going to talk about here today. And if you have not read that already, or the associated GitHub, I encourage you to do so. All right, I'm not going to read through all this, but a lot of stuff has happened, as always, in the transport area across numerous working groups. Everyone, pretty much every working group is making good progress on its charter. The only thing I really want to call out here is thanks to Wes Eddy from the TSVWG, who was brought on as a third working group chair specifically to help with the very intense work of getting L4S through the system. And that work is largely complete now. Thank you, Wes. And thank you to everyone else who contributed to that quite robust process. Is there anything in particular you'd like to say?
No, I think people can read it from there. I think of course, like Quick has been the champion of deliverables, and we have one working group in FSD4, which is basically slow progressing. But we'll see. Like in this IETF meeting, we're going to discuss more about how to progress on that one. I think you guys will be there and put your thoughts on it.
Also, later this week, MASC is likely to begin its rechartering discussion. So if that is something that you have input on, please find the time to join MASC. Very productive interim for the transport area. A ton of very important RFCs. HB3 is obviously probably the most salient, but major deliverables for Alto, major deliverables for IPPM, and SCTP, like obviously another major transport protocol. We did a complete revision of that spec. So nice work to everyone involved. It was a lot of work, and a whole bunch more stuff in the queue, including 793 BIS, TCP, probably foundational document of the transport area, I dare say, has completed its revision. So good work, everybody. This is our 3 times a year blurb for the transport area review team. As area directors, we find it incredibly useful for other transport experts to put another pair of transport aware eyes on drafts that come before us from other areas. It really informs our reviews. It's always looking for reviewers, and as you can see, the number in parentheses there is how many they had to do since IETF 113. See, it's averaging out to about a half a document per session, so I don't think anyone would claim that as an incredibly onerous workload. So if this is something that intrigues you to get a little broader exposure to what is going on across the IETF, please consider volunteering. You can contact either Wes or Magnus to join the team. And thank you to our reviewers. We also have an area directorship coming up for March, and so I'm going to pass the mic to Zahed.
Yeah, so I think you know, like AMCO is looking for announcing. Did you hear me right? Spencer, you were complaining about? Okay. So yeah, so if so it's about like nominating yourself, or somebody can, if you think somebody can be a good transport AD, you can nominate that person. The thing is, like, I can tell a bit my experience of running, sitting on the ISG, doing the transport AD. Yes, I must confess, like, you have to do some extra work, but that's the part of the job. I mean, you read about different things, you care about different things. There might be some fireworks that you need to firefight. So, but it's exciting. Sitting there for one term is exciting, and I would encourage everybody to actually, for the sake of your own experience, and for the sake of the serving the community, please come forward, nominate yourself, or nominate who you think should be running for the area director position. Thank you.
Yes, while Zahed has definitely been a great idea, a great partner, it is always important for the community to have choices. And I think a one-person race is never good for anything. So please do consider. And feel free to speak to either me or Zahed if you have any questions about what an area directorship is like. I think we'll both have pretty positive to say about it. Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to reach me. I mean, I'm here to help you.
Okay, a couple of important notable side meetings that have some pertinence to, well, actually one's not a side meeting, but some transport related things that are not on the area agenda. Number one, there's you can see there the details of a side meeting about OpenSSL. There's some discontent in the community that OpenSSL support for Quick is going to be not what some implementers had hoped. And Rich Sauls from Akamai is hosting this meeting to talk about a possible way forward. I don't want, at the danger of summarizing incorrectly, I'm going to say it's something to do with maybe forking OpenSSL and moving it to Apache. To find out more, you're going to have to go there. I don't have any more details. Also, IoT Ops is having a presentation by Kathleen Nichols and Van Jacobson about defined trust transport. It is aimed at limited domains, and which is why it's sitting in over IoT Ops. And we had a fairly packed agenda here at TSV area, so we could not take this talk. But as the draft title there suggests, there are very significant transport elements to it, and I'm sure that the proponents would love to have a good transport area showing on Friday to attend that talk and ask good questions. Okay, before we get to that, before we get to the main subject today, I think it's time for open mic. If anyone has any issues not related to the Congestion Control Working Group you would like to discuss with either of us area directors or the area as a whole, now would be the time to enter the queue or approach the mic. Going once? Anyone in the queue? No? Going twice? All right, everyone wants to talk about the main event. Great. Can I see a show of hands of who read the email that I sent that introduced this topic? Okay, about 3/4 of the room, maybe a little bit more, so that's good. In that case, I will move through this relatively quickly to give you guys more chance for some discussion. Just very briefly, why are we doing this? There's three problems of varying severity related to congestion control, and for now, I'm going to table the question of what we should call congestion control. That's an interesting discussion that I don't think we have time to get into today. But what we commonly know as congestion control is a difficult process to get through, as I think anyone who's tried to do it recently can attest. And it is so difficult that, in fact, many actors in the internet simply deploy things at scale, maybe with a SIGCOMM paper, and then come and sort of ask for ratification. And that's not, that's sort of forfeiting the ability of the congestion control experts in this room to shape those things before they reach scale. And so that's not, in my view, a particularly healthy way for the internet to develop. Furthermore, our only actual proposed standard is Reno/New Reno, which is not dead in the internet, but is a distinct minority of TCP traffic. And so our so-called standard does not really reflect the reality of what is going on out in the real world. Today, ICCRG, our kind of sister research group, is not producing documents for the most part. And lastly, TCP has traditionally been the venue for congestion control discussions because it was by far the most important consumer of that. But now we have 4 congestion controls of varying relevance and increasing relevance that all use very similar congestion control mechanisms, and having them all be sort of TCP native seems to be an antiquated conception of them.
So before we go,
sure,
we need a note taker.
Yes, I had made a very good point of order. We actually need someone to take minutes, and we forgot to get a volunteer beforehand and a Jabber scribe. There's no need to take notes for what's happening. I've just been reading slides up to now, so there's no need to try to retcon. But do I have a volunteer for either? Jake in the back for minutes. Thank you, and thank you, Jake, and Jabber scribe.
Shall I do the talking from the chat thing?
Jonathan, thank you very much. All right, that was painless. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so what would be the two things that, there's a two-pronged strategy to kind of address this problem. One is to beef up ICCRG. This is really a matter for the ICCRG chair, John A. Angar, and of course the IETF chair, Colin Perkins. We've spoken to Colin, and I think there's interest in certainly getting a co-chair and maybe expanding its de facto scope to include more experimental RFC production. And the second step is to charter a new working group here in the transport area of the IETF. Its kind of short-term goal would be to revise the process, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and then also to be open to standards track proposals. I don't know what will emerge. There's certainly a number of candidates out there. I don't know what will be ready for standardization in the near future, but this would be part of the purpose of that group. Okay, so here, in a perfect world, we get through all 4 of these questions today. We don't need to get through all 4 of these questions today. So I'm just going to run through them in order. Certainly, I'd like to get at least through a couple. So let's start with the first one. Do we agree that the problem, as I stated it, is a problem? Okay, we can just, let's see, is there a queue? How are we going to do this? Can we just all enter the queue through the, is that okay with everyone? If you can't enter the queue through the tool, just raise your hand and we'll add you manually. So, Jonna.
I'm trying to get this. Can you hear me?
There you
now?
are. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for kicking this off, and thank you for taking my question there, Martin. So I think this needs I don't know what the problem is that we're speaking about here. There were two things that you had on the why slide. If you could go back to that slide. I think the second one is a logistical problem. No, go back. Yeah. The second one is a logistical problem. I want to talk about the first and the third because I think those are the fundamental ones, right? So on the first problem, it's hard to get documents through the process, but I don't think that you talk about there being no standard but Reno. The problem here isn't that it's hard to get cubic through the IETF. Yes, it is, and we can solve it in other ways, but I don't think that is the fundamental problem here. For instance, I've been trying to get BBR documented and through the process. We had a lot of presentations from the Google folks over the, I'd say, past few years. We've had a lot of talk there, but what I've not seen is actual documentation and tracking of the document through a working group like process. And there's a fundamental reason why that doesn't happen. That primarily doesn't happen because congestion control remains unilateral. You don't need multiple parties to agree on exactly what it needs to do. And getting people in the room to talk about exactly how this ought to be done and how this should be done correctly or well is not something that is necessary for progress of deployment of this thing. So if anybody is proposing a new congestion control protocol, a new congestion controller, they don't need ratification from anybody, and they can deploy it if they have the ability to do it, and it happens. So it is fundamentally different than any other standards work that we do. So I want to call that out. Finally, on the third point, I want to say that with TCP, SCTP, Quick, and DCCP, SCTP and DCCP have been around for 20 years, right? So if the problems of multiple transports, we have had that before, and we've used TSVWG as a place to solve that problem in the past. So I'll say that the question to me, when you ask, do we agree on the question? It's not clear to me exactly what is the question. I don't want to talk about the solution of a new working group. I just want to understand which problem we are trying to solve here.
Okay, I think I should probably try to answer that. So, so the ICCRG thing is slightly orthogonal to the proposal on the table today, but I do think it's important to understand that that part of the thrust to solving this overall problem of sort of having a path to standardization is to have a more robust IRTF presence that is producing experimental drafts, because I think that's a clearly intermediate step to standardizing congestion controls. So the problem to solve is to fix the process. RFC 5033 defines the process, and I think it was written. I mean, I don't want to get into it, but I think it was written in a different time, and maybe needs to be reviewed. And that would be the first deliverable for this working group. Jonathan.
So I would respectfully disagree with Jana that it is a unilateral thing to deploy a congestion control. It does interact with other congestion controls sharing the same bottlenecks in the network. And, well, there needs to be at least some compatibility. There's also the possibility of future congestion controls which work in a different paradigm than the current ones, and so current assumptions might not be valid. So I think having somewhere to discuss all that specifically would be at least interesting.
Thank you. Torlis? Oh, I'm sorry, Gory. My mistake.
Hi. You hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in what you just said, Martin. Our guiding RFCs here are very old. They come from a different age. I like the idea to do something. I haven't yet seen any proposal which might work for a replacement. And I think I have heard also the reason. Better loss recovery or lower latency is something we can easily code for, we can easily measure. It's cool. People will deploy it, people will get the better one. When you come to congestion control, it's more tricky to demonstrate that you don't have a significant impact on other flows that use different algorithms or different types of bottleneck. That isn't so easy to measure. It requires quite a lot of evaluation from partners who aren't the key partners who want to deploy the new thing. So this is a tricky thing to get right. I don't think it should be an obstacle. I think we should move on, but we should also admit that this one is a tricky thing to measure. So tricky to measure, definitely need to update the words that guide this because they're old.
Now, Torlis.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe get up to the level where I see the working group can really help. And that is that now, as you said, we don't only have one protocol that, we keep alive, hundreds of PhD every year to improve congestion control on them. But we've got Quick, right? And there is the opportunity and the big risk that I see that a lot more, novel work is going to be done only on Quick, even though that's completely unnecessary. So the biggest reason I think, give or take all these wonderful details, Gory and myself and everybody else will then punch you with, but high level, take it out of protocol-specific working groups and make sure that everything congestion control is done once and applied equally to the different protocols that we have that are applicable to it. Seems like for the most general purposes, it's at least, Quick and TCP and maybe others as well, but making it modular so that, I mean, I've seen in so many other places in the IETF the duplication of work, right, where often it is necessary, right? Let's say, ISI is OSPF, we redo millions of encodings, right, just because we started twice. Let's try to see if we can, stop this from happening now between Quick and TCP. And that would be, the biggest starting point. And whenever you have more questions about thousands of details that I think we will disagree on, but I think this is the most important one to have the working group.
Thank you. Matt Joris.
So please introduce your name before you start speaking. Even if you are calling
Matt Joris. Meta and co-chair of Quick. So one thing that, kind of building on what Gory said, is that I find that the current discussion is somewhat lacking nuance in terms of distinguishing loss recovery from congestion control. So a lot of the proposed charter notes and a lot of the discussion has focused mostly on congestion control, and loss recovery is kind of in there as a sort of bolted on thing. And they're not strictly, they're related concepts, but not really the same thing. And I think it has implications insofar as how we develop mechanisms for different protocols. Loss recovery is often very protocol specific. So as an example for Quick, we have currently several adopted documents that where loss recovery is a integral part of what the documents are focusing on. And those being able to know like where the scope is, like what should be discussed by this proposed group versus like what should be discussed by the individual Quick working group would be useful to know, and what people think about that sort of thing, because they're, loss recovery is not necessarily done the same way between protocols, and neither is congestion control, but loss recovery especially can be very protocol specific.
Thank you, Matt. David.
Martin, I certainly admire your bravery, and I hope it's that, not something else, as this is a very complex space you've waded into. On question one, do I agree there's a problem? I would agree there is at least one problem. If you look at how congestion manifests in the internet writ large, there are at least three interesting domains. There is the access network, where we have inconvenient things like Wi-Fi and mobile devices that can't always send when they want to and have to deal with radio interference. We have the backbones, where for the most part we've evolved an operational paradigm that existence and evidence of congestion is existence and evidence of operator error. And then we have data centers, which are a completely different world. And I've seen a number of data center congestion control ideas that have come into the IETF and go nowhere, because we focus on the capital I internet, and these data center congestion control ideas are highly optimized for very low latency I know what my hardware is. I know how I put it together. I know what it does in environments, and hence won't fly on the general open internet. So yes, there's a problem. I think we should be doing something about it, and we ought to, as part of that, figure out what we do or don't want to do about data center congestion control.
Jana?
I think I missed a little bit of what David said at the end there, but I want to ask, I think this is what I was trying to do at the beginning. I didn't do a good job of it. There are I want to separate the discussion, if I may, and I don't want to take over the discussion here, but at least I want to say that I think we should separate the research part of the discussion. There are a lot of PhD, dissertations on congestion control, and a lot of people publishing papers. That's fine. We can, talk about those in ICCRG and other places. That's one part, but I want to separate that from the practical and the deployed congestion controllers, because I think that's the piece that's interesting to the IETF, and that's the piece that I think we ought to be interested in. So I'm going to just focus on that for a moment and say that if that's the focus, that's a difficult thing to do. Let's look at the current state of the world. If you look at the current state of the world, it's not just Reno or Cubic that's deployed. We've got BBR, we've got compound TCP, we've got FAST, and we've got a huge number of other congestion controllers that are deployed right now that have nothing to do with the IETF. And I want to call out that if you try to go out and try to get them to publish in the IETF, the first question they're going to ask you is why? Why should I come publish a document here? What do I get out of it? And then trying to keep that motivation and energy going. And I want to share one experience here that we've had, right? Most recently is with BBR. I love the BBR proponents, and I think they've done a fantastic job of coming and presenting and discussing at the in ICCRG meetings. However, there is a continual desire to understand, not on their part, but I think that's always been there, to understand what the purpose of engaging in document form, at least, not just in talking and presenting what's going on, but in document and publishing a document, going through the pain of actually publishing an RFC rather than just putting out a blog post or a simple paper. What is the value of doing that? And it is my opinion, and somebody else, you can disagree with me if you want. It is my opinion that there isn't a value to them of getting a document published in the standards track, because there is no standard here to be published. By the time it gets to the standard set 2 years from now, the document, the algorithm is not going to be the same. And it shouldn't be the same. It's evolving, it's continuously evolving. Congestion control is not static. Yes, we have Reno as a document. That doesn't mean that what's deployed out there is what is published in that document. It's not. You've got all kinds of variants deployed out there right now, even of the simplest Reno algorithm. So it's fundamentally difficult to try and capture this, to try and take this thing and put it in a bottle and try to fit it in the form that we have for RFCs or for IETF documents, because those are fundamentally for interoperable standards. Congestion control is not an interoperable standard. I want to say one last thing to Matt's point about loss recovery. I completely agree. Loss recovery is a separate but important thing. And I want to remind us that we've done this in the past again. SCTP, if you go back to the mid-2000s, you will see documents which are like early retransmit comes to mind, limited transmit comes, early retransmit comes to mind at least. We have things in there which have like sections of TCP and SCTP, and you go to the relevant experts to get those portions reviewed. And I believe that TSVWG used to be the house for it. I still will ask the question of what is TSVWG to do if we have a separate thing for this? What is the overlap and what's the gap between the two algorithms, between the two working groups? Sorry. And finally, last point on data center controllers. The problem that you have of motivating people to come document things that they've deployed already in the wild is like 1,000 times harder when you get to data center controllers, because they have really no motivation to come and talk to this group. So I'll ask the question of what do we, if we want to charter a new working group for doing congestion control work, I'd like to see people in the room who are working or have deployed these controllers come up and say, yes, I want to document these in this working group, and I'm happy to review those documents. But I want to see people raising hands to say, yes, I want to document this congestion controller that we've deployed.
Yes, that's certainly one of the objectives today, is see if people are actually going to write documents. I think John raises an interesting point, which is that if the purpose of the working group is to reinvigorate and then use a process to generate standards track congestion control documents. If the community does not agree that generating standards track congestion control documents is important, then we don't need a working group. The research group can publish documents and so on. But there's people in the queue, so now we'll give Spencer. Do you have a quick response there, David? Is that
Yeah,
the issue?
this David Black, wearing my CHWG chair hat. John asked, what is CHWG going to do if we stop arguing about congestion control? Useful work. Please look at the agenda for our meeting coming up next.
Thank you. Spencer.
Spencer Dawkins. I had two thoughts, and I'm trying to remember both of them, but let's go with this one. One of the things that I wonder about is whether it is useful to break up congestion control into the components that we're talking about, like rate control or loss recovery and things like that, and see if that helps any. If there is some component of that it is particularly controversial or dumb to try to do in the IETF or something like that, maybe it would be good to know what that is. My second one is I would remind all of us here that working groups can also produce BCPs. And it seems like to me, if one of the things we're trying to do is give a signal that competing fairly with New Reno is not the only criteria for us to standardize something. And that, this was the discussion we had when we charted Quick. It's like, well, is anybody going to use that? Don't care. It's standardized, and we're doing standardized. We want to have one standardized congestion controller. So I mean, like for that one, I was there. So I would ask the group to consider whether producing a BCP that could guide ICCRG so that the ICCRG guys can research anything that they want to, but also to give them some kind of clue about what the IETF would expect for their output if it's supposed to go into the IETF, especially as standards track. So, because right now the answer is New Reno and no one cares, and that can't be good guidance for ICCRG.
Thank you. I'm going to close the queue in a little bit to move on to some of the other things that other slides presented, but consider. Oh, if you have a quick response, please go ahead, Didi.
I just wanted to respond to Jenna about this is Vidi from Apple. I wanted to respond about whether folks are interested in publishing standards track for congestion control. Yes, we are, and I mean, at least I am. And I think what Spencer said about that we are using Reno as kind of like the only standards track documents, and every time we try to publish something else, it's always compared to New Reno, and maybe New Reno shouldn't be a standards track if that's the case, if we don't want any standards track congestion control, because we just end up comparing with Reno, and I don't know how that's valuable in today's time. And when it comes to, so I agree there's a problem to the first question, and we should publish standards track congestion control algorithms. And if that's something that everyone agrees on, then what's the place where we do that? Because there isn't any. Right now, Cubic is being, making progress in TCPM. It's not the right place. And we're also working on L4S congestion control. And at some point, we do want to take it forward from experimental to standards track. So where would we publish that? So these are some open questions because these apply not to TCPM alone. So yeah.
Thank you. All right, the queue is closed. Bernard?
Yeah, it seems to me that RFC 5033 does need to be revised, and I think that's fairly uncontroversial. And in the process of doing that, you may want to try to work through some of the procedural things that people have been talking about here. So I think definitely the 5033 revision should go forward, and that may help address some of the issues and figure them out over time. You don't have to know everything right away to charter this working group.
Thank you, Torlis.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of, what shall I say, Roman Empire chief concern officers, and that is all good and important when we want to, do something for the internet and the next standard or so. But I don't think we should be constrained to that, and I think that's always been the problem that I've seen TCPM and TSVWG, right? So I mean, we should hopefully still have experimental as well, right? I mean, as I said, that gives you the risk that, hundreds of PhD students with their ideas will come to this working group and not only stay in ICCRG. Maybe that's not a bad thing if we really want to establish a community focused on congestion control, and then try to figure out if there is one or two experimental ones that we can adopt and slowly start, having enough experience in the community to really, get to that long-term standards for the internet, right? But I also think there are a lot of better congestion controls for controlled networks, right? I mean, we have the big internet, but there's so much more TCP quick or so in a lot of other networks, whether it's satellite network, industrial networks, all these networks where we can come up with a lot more, advanced congestion control much more quickly and not have to bother that much. And it's just that, with the groups we have right now, it's very hard to expand and improve.
Yeah, so I think there is a point of like bringing like all the work to IETF, but there is also a point like having all the PhDs and all the academic work, all the research, new research on the congestion control go through some sort of like ICCRG before coming, if this working group happens, before coming to this one, because I think this working group, if it happens, the accepting a work will have a really high bar of like getting deployment and getting support where people will be implementing those things. I think that should be one of the criteria in this working group, if this happens, we'll consider.
So the other point I'd like to add is that, so experimental RFCs can, of course, come out of the IR or the IETF. As a practical matter, the IRTF bar is, I think it's safe to say, a little bit lower in terms of just how many veto points it has to pass through. So like as a practical matter, if you want experimental RFC, IRTF is probably easier, and I'm frankly fine with that. If there's a strong desire for the actual IETF stamp of approval on experimental documents, I don't have a fundamental issue with that happening in this proposed working group, but I'm not sure there would be a lot of demand for that. Jonathan.
A very quick point, just to, it was questioned a little earlier about why New Reno is a proposed standard specifically. And the reason is that it provides the minimum required functionality to avoid congestion collapse in the internet. So there is a standard for doing that. If you do that minimum or something compatible with that minimum, then the internet is safe. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. Sorry, this little presentation thing just crashed, but all right. I would just like to briefly run through a couple more slides before we open up for more discussion, because we're starting to bleed into what this group would exactly do. And I'm not going to read the whole charter to you, nor are we going to come to consensus on the exact wording of a charter today. But I think there are two salient things to this discussion. First of all, I mean, there's two basic categories here. One is like the administrative work to clean up the process, and the second one is to actually approve new congestion controls. At this point, I don't actually know what new congestion controls in the course of the next year or two will feel they're ready to be standardized rather than experimented with. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But this slide here just shows the administrative work that has to happen first. One is RFC 5033 bis. This is a 15-year-old document that explains the process on how to go standards track, and it is written for a world, like in my opinion, I wasn't there, but it was explained to me, is written for a world where congestion controls came out of academia, and really the IETF was an effective gatekeeper to wider deployment, and that is, at least I thought it was. although cubic might be a counterexample. And that is not the world anymore. So reviewing it in that light and seeing is like what is the trade-off between huge performance gains in the internet and some damage to existing neural users? Like, is the correct bar the right one? Clearly, the bar is not you can just stomp on everybody. But you know, there's a continuum there that I would like the community to work out. The second item is to develop a framework, and I don't know what this looks like, to accommodate all the transport protocols that use these sorts of standard congestion controls. Like if you have, say, an implementation of a new something like BBR, and you did it in TCP and it works, and you did it in Quick and it works, but you didn't do it in SCTP, is it safe to standardize it for SCTP? I don't know, but maybe the community has an answer to that. And then I wrote this here, like TCPM, of course, is going to publish cubic. I don't know if that needs to be, if there needs to be some sort of sidecar to that to adapt to the other protocols, but that would be a nice test case for that kind of work. And then the other part was just, I wanted to again, this is a straw man charter. This is pretty far from becoming a working group right now, but I do have some language in here about if algorithms do come forward that are ready, and one that is probably ready, frankly, is DCTCP right now, which is an informational RFC, in case you didn't realize that. But anyway, so the idea that this is open to taking those standardization efforts if they arise. We won't keep the group open forever when the administrative work is done, just in case an algorithm shows up. But what's probably most interesting here is the scope of this. I think I've already seen some pushback on loss recovery, which is fine, and that's noted, and I'm inclined to take that advice. But also there's the question of domain. I wrote this pretty broadly to not only be you know, like open internet download, you know, traditional file download stuff, but also, you know, media congestion control, multipath stuff, special use cases like data centers, Internet of Things, etc. And you know, I think it opens the scope a little more and will probably increase the congestion controls ready for standardization don't necessarily grow on trees. And I think opening the scope a little bit creates the right body of expertise and also increases the probability that we'll have a steady stream of work. But that's really all I had to present. I'd like to open the queue up again for people who want to comment on any of this.
Yeah, just repeating, I think what I just said in before, maybe, you know, that first bullet point, standardization there, I think might not only include experimental, right? I mean, depending on how careful you want to be, the most careful thing is a separate sentence about new experimental work may be added to the charter, you know, upon, you know, interest by the community and agreement by the AD, right? So that's the most defensive position. The more you put experimental into the charter, the easier it is to have these, what did I say, hundreds of PhD, you know.
Okay, thank you, Torlis. Ian. Yeah, again, please state your name and affiliation at the mic.
Ian Sweat, Google. Yeah, with the charter with the loss recovery removed, I would support much more strongly. I do think this work is worth doing. It's kind of unfortunate that Cubic is about to be standardized yet again in TCPM, and there's no applicable quick specification. And similarly, BBR is, you know, also not kind of a standard track item and not written as designed for quick. But I think the recent resumption information about like cross connection resumption and such, as mentioned in the quick working group, could potentially belong in here. So I'm generally supportive of it being created, and this charter looks like it's going in the right direction. Yeah.
Anyone else? Torlis.
What I asked, right? So in terms of maybe the concerned officers, if you know, if you ask these working group chairs of the existing groups how they think it overlaps with any of the work items that are in their groups, and come to conclusion what that should mean for that work, right?
Yeah,
so that's not directly the charter, but maybe they want the charter to be, you know, refined so
Sure.
that it works
Yeah.
best for them.
I mean, Cubic's so close, we'd clearly use that in TSVM, but if there's other work that I might not be aware of that's out there, we can discuss that. Jana.
Hello. I know I'm being very curmudgeonly today, but perhaps that's my role today. I don't understand the question of the charter because I'm still stuck on the premise of the working group. And am I to comment on the charter based on acceptance of the questions that we asked upfront? I guess I'll say this, right? Like there's a lot to be unpacked here, in my opinion. And the problem here is that I've put my comments on the chat, so they'll be available for later as well. But I'm happy to engage in this. I think there's misalignment between where the IETF is and where people working on these things are. Yes, you will definitely get some work. There's never a working group at the IETF that has no work, right? The question ultimately is how much impact you actually want to have. And I'll say that if you want to have a certain amount of impact, let's look at the congestion control and loss recovery landscape and ask what are the big things that we need that we've missed over the past 5 years for not having this venue. And will this venue actually create a space where those things will get addressed? And I don't see that. So if we create a venue that's open-ended enough that we'll have work coming in, absolutely you'll have that. But my fear is it'll become busy work, it'll become committee work, and it risks become irrelevant. And that is my concern. Once we open up something like this, it's hard to close it. So I want to know exactly what are we targeting here, in more precise terms than general ones. Because I understand opening up 5033, for example, seems like a concrete thing, but honestly, that could be a 5-year effort in of itself, because that's a pretty broad researchy question to ask what is a safe congestion controller to be deployed. We've tried to address this in many ways in ICCRG, in various fora, and we've not gotten very far. So to be able to address those questions, I don't think it's a concrete ask. It's a concrete ask to say, let's publish a new version of it. But that conversation is going to get out of hand very quickly. So I guess what I'm saying is, what are the top level items that we'd want to get addressed, given that this is the engineering forum, right? This is the IETF, not the IRT.
So to answer your question, on one level, this is administrative work, right? To clean up processes, to so on and so on. I would say that there are a few things out there that are emerging out, like BBR, like TCP Prague, that are probably close to being, if not already, well, certainly in the real world are experimental, could be experimental RFCs at some point. And after that, years of effort to clean up this process, we would be in a place where we could actually realistically try to standardize them if we felt they were ready and if they have successful experiments. I don't think that if they were ready to standardize today, we would be in a good position to do it based on our recent experience trying to standardize congestion controls. Right. So Torlis.
Yeah, just quickly, Jana, can you reformulate what you said as changes to the proposed charter, because it's not quite clear what you would like to have added or removed to get to the point that you like to have. Maybe we can take that to the list, but I think maybe that would help better to make progress here.
Okay, Jana, go ahead and respond.
Tolis, I think I'm questioning the premise of the working group itself, right? So to ask me to revise the charter so that I would delete the charter, basically, is what I'm suggesting, but that's not constructive. But I am asking a question about exactly what the charter is supposed to be. Writing it out in words is fine. We can do that. But to your point, Martin, of documenting, say, BBR, this is concrete. So let's say, if I saw input documents to charter a working group, what I want to see is what are the input documents going into this. I don't see any. I mean, this is not a BOF, which is also confusing me a little bit because it's not articulated as a BOF, but it's what I'm calling BOF-ish. It's not clearly in the bar, so it's not a bar BOF. But But is BBR one of the documents we're talking about? Is a new loss recovery mechanism that is shared between Quick and TCP one of the documents? Is compound TCP one of the documents? Like, what are the documents that are going in that we're going to say, okay, well, these are documents that will form the core of our initial bunch of work?
Right.
So-
But can I just quickly, sorry.
Yes.
So the if this is, for example, exactly to that point, like are the individual solutions that have been built like BBR and others at the correct stage, then I think what this working group may start to do is similar to what we did in multicast, decades ago, when reliable multicast, with congestion, with all that stuff, the thousands of solutions from researchers were brought to the IETF, we exploded, and ultimately we said, let's define the building blocks and let's assess them. And I think the first slide had basically those principles, right? So one of the things we can achieve is then, if enough people think that BBR and the others aren't ready or so, then let's force the BBR and other people to work toward the criteria that we do through this working group, and through that intermediate step, we will then develop whether or how we can adopt BBR and others as experimental or standards, right? So take it a step further down, look into the, the congestion control stuff, and then go back and look at the full protocol specifications for them.
So I would just to answer your question, John, in terms of things ready to be standardized now, I think they are things that are that we're well aware of and have the wrong status, like Cubic for non-TCP protocols, like DC-TCP. I think those are all pretty well established, very stable, well understood, ready for standard. This other stuff is not ready to be standardized, in my opinion. It is ready to be experimented on. I would like to see experimental RFCs for all of those relatively soon, if it were up to me, which it's not. But my hope is that if we get all this work done, that we would be ready when they are ready to be standardized in a few years' time. But like the charter does not name those protocols, because those algorithms, because I really don't know what's going to emerge out of the process over the next few years. Gori.
Hi, you asked about the charter. I'm not so happy with that first bullet here. To me, each of these seems to spawn off its own problem set that we want to look at, like how to do multipath properly and what you might use for scheduling and what IoT transport really looks like and how it aggregates. So I'm worried that that widens the scope. I think if we're going to be successful in producing better guidance and getting Cubic through and Prague or whatever that turns out to be, we shouldn't be looking at everything all at the same time. So to me, they look like research problems. Research problems we'd love to solve, but not ones we need to standardize right now.
Bob, you're in the queue.
Hi there, I'm Bob Briscoe, independent. In terms of the, Jana's question as to what drafts would come into this, I think I was trying to wait before bringing this up because I've said this on the mailing list about adding AQMs to this. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's just very briefly to catch people up on that. One of the problems we're trying to solve here is sort of congestion in the TSVWG working group as well. And AQM needs the same expertise as congestion control, largely defining the problem means thinking about the two at the same time. And so I think it'd be useful if they were both in the same working group. And so in answer to Jana's problem, I would see things like FQCODL, pi, or an extension to pi like the pi squared or something like that, the dual pi squared, eventually coming in as possible candidates for standards track.
Thank you, Bob. So I'll use that segue to say that this charter is on GitHub, and I would strongly encourage you to file issues if there are specific concrete changes you would like to make. And I've captured some stuff that was already on the list. I'm not sure all these are necessarily good ideas, but a lot of them are. So please take a look at that. I would actually like to take a moment to, as we're running out of time here, to have like a show of hands of people that, okay, first of all, I haven't heard.
You want to use the tool?
Yeah, we could use the tool, but let me preface that by saying that I hear some concern, some totally legitimate concern from Jana if this is like going to be a productive exercise to set up this working group. And aside from that, fairly strong support for doing so. So I'm going to ask you people to use the show of hands tool to ask, like, without committing. I'm not going to take names or like take this as a promise, but given those documents that we discussed, let me see if I can find them. There we go. 5033 BIS, like this framework thing, maybe one or two other existing informational documents that should become standards. Like, who would be inclined? Yeah. Can I do it from here?
Yeah, you can do it from there.
Or this thing? Nope, can't do it with that thing. Thank you. Would you be inclined to help write any, I can't type, to co-author any of these drafts? Oh, European keyboard. 1 minute. The question mark is what I'm looking for. There we go. Okay, start it. And while the votes are coming in, I would say that Zahid and I are going to take a look at the results of this discussion, and also peruse the chat, which we've not had a chance to do at this point. I'm seeing about 13. Yeah, it's not done yet, but like a fairly large number. Certainly, if they all said yes, which they won't ultimately, that would certainly be more than enough people to write these products. Yes, sir.
I mean, you asked the most important question first. I hope you're not stopping there, right? Because I mean, I think there are people that really just like to see the work happening, even if they don't feel competent to contribute as for.
Well, I mean, I do think there's a okay, yeah. Yeah. So Torres, frankly, I've detected pretty strong support with not by any means unanimous support, but pretty strong support for this. And if anyone thinks this is a bad idea besides Jana, or is concerned it's a bad idea besides Jana has not said so, please feel free to do so, either here or on the list. So like I think based on this, I feel pretty positive about it. So I would invite you to continue to discuss this on TSVAREA list. I would invite you to file topics on GitHub and discuss the points in the GitHub, and we can start to evolve this document. And if you are interested, if you decide after this on-the-spot question, if you decide that you actually really would like to work on these products, please contact me. We can maybe organize you. And if we have a couple drafts, 0 drafts are ready to go, then we can really think about getting this started. I don't know if we're going to do a BOF at 115 or just do it. It depends on how the speed goes and if we think there are questions still be resolved. But if we have authors lined up and chairs lined up and people seem to more or less reach consensus on the charter, then we probably won't. If not, we probably will. If like all the interest dies away, we won't do either. But okay, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I think the important part here is like this community need to decide like what they want to do with it, and they have to come up with this working, because we are now we're guiding this work, guiding the idea of this creating this working group, but we all have to work on it. So it's important that you try to contribute and try to convince also to the community like what you want to achieve here. So that's the important part. The second question we wanted to ask, if this community is willing to contribute.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
Right. Okay, so thank you very much. If anyone, we have a couple minutes. Does anyone have any last comments for the good of the area? Last call for comments. Jana.
Hey, thanks. I wanted to share something more constructive here, right? Basically, I've said this for a while, and I want to repeat that here. I think that congestion control is an active and dynamic space. And I think we ought to engage in that space. We ought to create a forum for it. I just don't think that using the same standard templates that we've always used is the right way to go about it. I think that we need to create a space where people can engage, where people can bring their work that they're doing, and maybe the format is different. And I want to have a broader discussion about this rather than an administrative one about whether we should do a working group to open up 5033 or not, because I really think that that's not the most valuable and impactful things that we can do. In terms of valuable and impactful things that we can do, I think we can create a community. I think we can create a community of people who are not at the IETF, who are in the industry working on congestion controllers, but we bring them in. And I'm happy to discuss and I'm happy to brainstorm on what outputs those things can produce. If all it is a video, if all it is a presentation, that's still super valuable. If all it means is that we are all sitting around in the room and having a dinner and talking about things, that's still super valuable. So I think there are constructive things that we can and should do. I try to do some of these things while we are still meeting in person through ICCRG, but I'm very happy to engage on those conversations. I think that that is where I want to put my effort.
Lovely, John. Of course, as chair of ICCRG, you're in pretty good shape to help build that community, and I encourage you to do so. I have no objection at that. If you have other concrete proposals in that area, feel free to email me or take it to the TSV area list. I'm sure that's certainly germane to what we're talking about here. No one else is in the queue, and I have 2:30. So thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful week here in Philadelphia. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Thought that was important. Oh, well, we adjourned the meeting. Oh, that one? Oh, it's okay. Like it doesn't. I mean, the exact numbers don't matter. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're not taking the names.
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
not
that's
taking
fine.
the names. So if you miss that one, you can still put in the Jabber. I think Jabber is closed right now, but you can also send an email. I think you should actually come to the next. I mean, yeah.
Hi, Sean. Next time we meet you in person.
And
yeah.
basically.
Here I am.
I mean, I see like that. So
sure.
Very important to be show you.
Okay.
So I think that's important.
Where?
So, but
I guess I can still just talk to the room from here, huh?
What?